All right. Looks like I've been live for a little bit. It's a little frustrating with. Okay, now I'm live. I have to apologize. I mean, I just scheduling these videos is tricky because it, it doesn't really give me a countdown. I'm not sure how everything works or is meant to work, and it usually seems to get hung up as I count down or seem to count down to a live session. But here I am now. So let's get started. I mean, how was your week this week? Hopefully, it was a good one. Um, I had the opportunity to meet with a good friend of mine, Sri, who's an artist, and we had a discussion about art and her art and her evolution as an artist, which is in itself a beautiful story. And I got to thinking about some of the work I had done, man, 15 odd years ago now, back when I was studying communications at a higher level. Um, I was in a course, communications ethics course, and we had to write four different papers. And as I worked through, I really got myself together and wrote these two papers, my last two papers, that were kind of getting at some interesting topics that have stuck with me ever since then and that I've thought about quite a bit, have wanted to share more widely, but really haven't shared probably as much as I could. I should probably try and publish them somewhere, at least alter them for 2020 and publish them further. But essentially, the topics for these, and I've got a number of windows open here on my screen, so I'm going to be looking up at my other screen. But the title of these kind of companion papers, one was called The Illusory Images of the Cyborg, and the other one was called The Culture Industry's Warm Cocoon. And I thought those titles were a little provocative, but the content I think is even more provocative. And I wrote these back in like 2005, 2006. And essentially, what I was trying to get at was the fact that photography is something that is deceiving. And in essence, when photography was first formed with Louis Daguerre and the daguerreotype years ago, um, the idea was such that he was trying to create almost something as a replacement for art, something that created an aura of art. And I don't think everyone realized that that was kind of a pejorative in a way. But when you think about the first photograph and when the first photograph was created, um, he wasn't photographing people per se, he was photographing a still life. So it was a still life of some of his earliest plates, and I'm getting this information from his biography in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where he talks about kind of the duality of the photographic medium. So he kind of saw it as a medium of artistic expression and as a powerful scientific tool. So he was kind of taking images of art that already existed. So if you're taking a photograph of art that's been created, or you're trying to replicate a still life that someone would paint, does that picture, a photograph, become an aura, the aura of art? And that first idea kind of was planted long ago with the first photograph. So if you're creating the aura of art, you're creating something that kind of inherently might be false, might be a deception. And that theme was really carried on later. There's this kind of important treatise written by these two guys, Adorno and Horkheimer, in 1944, this paper called The Culture Industry, Enlightenment as Mass Deception. So what I argue in this paper is that that photograph, the idea that um, this aura of art this deception of the photograph was kind of Pandora's box, really opening a can of worms. I mean, creating something that led us on this path toward um, a culture industry, an industry of culture. And think about that term. You know, culture in itself. What does that term culture mean? It represents so many different things, and when you pair the idea of culture with an industry, it's almost kind of, I don't feel like it necessarily goes together. Culture and industry, culture seems something that should be more pure, should be something that is a natural outgrowth of who we are. But when you turn it into an industry, you know, what happens to that? You know, does art and the aura of art become an ideology that leads to the creation of movies, deception, marketing, advertising, ideas that get programmed into us about how to consume, how to be a consumer, how to be marketed to. So I use this phrase in my paper. I said the pejorative aura of art is necessarily rife in inferior artwork, imitators of true art who create an identity of similarity, a melange of tired metaphors. So think about it. If you're not really creating art, but you're creating something that is meant to create an aura, you're creating something to sell, to purchase, to get us to follow something that maybe doesn't necessarily represent the true art. So there's this space between maybe advertising and actual art. Maybe the space in which we create a commercial or an ad, we call that art. I mean, an art director creates these kind of things and works with a marketing department, but its purpose is not the authentic idea of art. The purpose is, let's get you to follow our brand. Let's get you to have this affinity with our brand based on something we're creating that is, I don't know, maybe it's not truly authentic. It's just something to think about. It's kind of a complex idea, but I also kind of feel like we have to think about it because a culture industry, maybe that's naturally deviant because, you know, according to Adorno and Horkheimer, culture should not be manufactured. Culture should come from a true essence. It should be something that we just experience. We don't have to think about. We don't have to create. Culture should be there. So, I don't know. Maybe this is going a little too deep today, but I want to try and get across the ideas because I think these are important ideas, especially in 2020 with social media and all the things that we consume. I mean, every minute we're consuming stuff just with our eyes, with what we hear, with what we see, and we're drawing relations to things that become, I don't know, they drive us in a certain direction, all having to do with this kind of culture industry. So think about it. Think about movies. Adorno and Horkheimer say the movie script and the entertainment formula it promotes is its own reality, more real than real life. So here's the quote, and this is in 1944. The sound film, far surpassing the theater of illusion, leaves no room for imagination or reflection on the part of the audience who is unable to respond within the structure of the film, yet deviate from its precise detail without losing the thread of the story. Hence, The film forces its victims to equate it directly with reality. So, just saying, um, this is in 1944. So, they're already looking at what might be deviant in filmmaking because it creates a reality that isn't reality. Now we have high definition, we have media everywhere. You know, we get lost in Netflix and movies, and that seems like reality to us, but maybe it isn't. Reality is what we're experiencing every minute. Me coming through this computer to you right now may not really be reality. It's this facsimile of reality. That's what a photograph is. It's a tiny sliver of time that's taken out of context to show you something that isn't giving you the whole truth. So I think you need to understand that when you look at photography, it's there to trick you. It's the trickster in your midst. And it's used in such a way by all sorts of people in power to depict something that isn't necessarily the reality. So I'm not saying don't enjoy a photograph and don't take photos, but remember that you just caught that tiny, tiny millisecond, and that's all it is. And then a film is all of these images in motion. So you're just turning a photograph into this infinite idea, and you're watching it on the screen, but all that is moving pictures, and it's not really reality. Okay, would it be interchangeable? Culture shaped industry and vice versa. Yeah, I guess. I mean, I guess I'm trying to get at something a little bit different here, and that's the idea that the culture industry leads us in a direction that we need to be aware of. So, again, it comes down to this kind of idea of media literacy. Are we literate with the media that we consume? And what does media literacy mean in 2020? I mean, it was pretty clear back in the 90s. Um, Reality exists in our words. When action matches with words, it becomes reality. Yeah. So, words, think about words. I mean, what do they represent? What kind of meaning do words carry? Um, that may kind of be a similar construct or a similar idea. I don't want to say construct. Just this idea that what we speak and what comes out of our mouths, the words don't always get at the absolute truth. It's that idea that I've spoken about before, the map is not the territory. The map only represents another facsimile of reality that isn't really the reality. So that's what I'm trying to get at here. Um, so when you think about photography and you think about moving pictures and you think about everything speeding up the way it's speeding up in 2020, media literacy becomes about, well, social media literacy, digital literacy, understanding how all these tools that we take for granted may compromise our thought and put us in a compromised situation where if we're not cognizant of how these messages are meant to be received, we can be tricked by them. There are a lot of causal loops at work here. If you think of this in terms of kind of systems theory, these reinforcing things are happening that change our thinking, that rewire our brains. But the whole idea is to get us to consume. And what are you consuming? What are you spending money on? How are you getting things moving in a certain direction that creates a profit, that benefits society, that feeds the economy? I see how it all needs to work together. I'm just saying that, think about it a little more deeply and think about what images and media in a photograph, in a movie, are trying to get you to do. And how are they altering your reality? How are they reformatting your ethics? Let's talk about that a minute. Because when I talked about the illusory images of the cyborg, I was referring to a paper that was written in 2003, which I found really interesting. It was called Virtual Alterity and the Reformatting of Ethics. So I dug into that and really thought it through. Um, the study of ethics has had this kind of standard operating procedure. You know, we think about animal ethics, human ethics, you know, how an animal looks at things. Um, but we think of ethics from a human perspective. But when you introduce a cyborg into the ethical framework, you have to think about machine ethics as well. And this kind of ties into the whole idea of the singularity, and that, you know, this movement of artificial intelligence and technology becoming the absolute truth, outstripping humanity. It's another kind of what I call the triangulation, that we need to redefine our ethics, considering this appearance of the cyborg in our midst. Um, Ultimately, we can't think about things just in terms of Immanuel Kant and his idea of ethics. Um, you know, his critique of pure reason, or critique of practical reason. You know, he argued that what is ethical is necessarily reasonable, and what is reasonable is necessarily ethical. I don't think that applies anymore, because how do we even know what's reasonable anymore when we're fed so much content constantly, and all of this content is trying to force us to act to benefit kind of a, I don't want to say a machine, but the machine of consumerism. I guess I end up constantly going back to that. I mean, I've worked in marketing, I've worked in branding, I've worked in copywriting, creating things that help sell products. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't get me wrong. I'm just asking that you become a skeptic, and that you don't let these things become overly manipulative to you, that you understand the difference between art and the aura of art, and don't let the aura of art take advantage of you, because it's not the true essence of what we need to try and strive for. I don't know. Let me know if you're following what I'm saying. I mean, I'm trying to give you, you know, how do I say, to see how a view into my thinking on some of this stuff, and how I've shaped my thinking, starting with this stuff that I thought about 15 years ago. It hasn't left me. So how do you take all of this content, and if you guys are interested, I can share these papers that I wrote, and you can give them a read and see what you think. We can talk further about it. Maybe we have kind of a little chat, where we can talk face to face through these moving pictures that tell us something about ourselves, that, you know, maybe an aura of art, not the actual art, but still we have to use the tools, right? Um, but I'm rambling again. I guess what I'm trying to say is that, how do we live effectively amidst the cyborgs, amidst social media, amidst the constant flood of content? How do you curate that? How do you find the meaning in it? How do you find, you know, an actual connection between things that doesn't lead you in a direction that is only about consuming? So if the facsimile of reality becomes reality, you know, what comes after that? If reality is completely changed and we've altered it, what is reality then? What do you think? I mean, it shouldn't be up for debate, but I think we've created a culture where reality is up for debate. I mean, you know, this was before I truly understood what virtual reality was and artificial intelligence. Um, Not just virtual reality, what's the other one? Augmented reality, and now mixed reality, which is virtual reality and augmented reality put together. Um, what does that stuff tell us? You know, how do we get back to nature? You know, like I like to say, nature bats last. So we can create all this technology and all of these ideas about how technology is going to save us and is going to become our future. But I remember back in like 2010, I was walking through an airport and I'm like, shit, man, future's here. I feel like I'm living in the future now. And that was 10 years ago. You know, and where are we now? Are we like in this hyper future that's kind of moved beyond that? It's like, man, suddenly it's kind of like hitting you over the head. Like, man, we're living in the future. The past is pretty much an illusion based on our own perceptions of how we want to perceive it and how we want to interpret it. But you're only here now, and I just waited because now I'm in the future. So I'm here right now, but I waited a few seconds, I'm in the future. So we're always going into the future. How do you propel yourself in the most positive way that you live life the way you need to live it? You interpret all of the things coming at you all the time, no matter how hard you try to turn it off, and make yourself effective. And I think that comes down to giving to others, you know, reaching that point in your life where you can say, okay, it's not about me. To make it about me, I have to make it about other people. And I think that's really the main lesson. Regardless of all of this tech and the infinite scroll and the attention economy, all the things vying for our brain, our bandwidth, and to rewire our brains for us, all of that stuff, you need to kind of calibrate up to another level that is even at a higher altitude, that sees that stuff for what it is. Communications systems always have loads of noise in them, and it's really sifting through that noise to find the real truth. That's where we need to be, that's where we need to go, and that's how we get there. Um, Trying to rise above it, trying to be more, trying to do what you can to be your authentic self. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. If you have other thoughts on this topic, have you really thought about what photography means? You know, how have governments throughout history, well, since photography first appeared over 150 years ago or so, how have governments used photography to further an agenda? Comes from all sides, you know, gets into this idea of propaganda. Propaganda isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, Jacques Ellul talks about propaganda being a way to kind of curate thought for the public. It doesn't have to come across as something negative per se. Obviously, propaganda is seen as a pejorative and a bad thing, but think about it. Propaganda in these times helps people make sense of all of this information that's constantly coming at them. So just be conscious of how propaganda is used and how photography is propaganda, how branding is propaganda, and that it doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it often is. Um, think about what a computer means, what algorithms mean. You know, a computer computes algorithms and code to create its environment. But ultimately, the computer is a euphemism for the cyborg, and it's simulating nature that has wound us ever more tightly into our relationship with the machine. So that's a sentence from the paper that I wrote. All all a com- all a computer can provide to humans is a visual image in multitudinous forms. The level of deception is magnified to such an extent that it replaces our understanding of reality and becomes our benchmark for truth. So, the facsimile of reality is now reality. What comes next? I guess that's my question for you guys. I felt like we were there in 2010. We were living in the future. It's now 2020. Where is this technology taking us? And who's in charge? The tech or the humans? And who should be in charge? And who's going to drive? I think we all should be driving ourselves, but we all should be collaborating, evolving, and getting to a future that we can all find our own truth in. So I'm at about 25 minutes. That's usually where I wrap. I'm going to wrap it up here. Let me know your thoughts. Keep adding to the comments, direct message me, talk to me. Happy to go deeper on some of this stuff if you want, or to, pump the brakes and get to something that's a little more elegant and parsimonious and simple. Simple's difficult, but you can get there. It takes complexity to get to simple. All right, have a great week. I'll think about a topic for next Sunday. If there's something you'd like me to riff on or talk about, shoot me a note. Let me know if there's a topic that you find interesting that you'd like me to go a little deeper on, because I'm happy to do that. I'd love to talk more about language. Maybe next week I talk a bit about cross culture. Talk about kind of Confucianism versus individualism. I shouldn't say versus. Really how those things fit together, and how cultures, cross-cultural communications really are going to shape the future, and having a better understanding of that. So if you like that topic, let me know. I've done some research on that as well, and I definitely have a point of view. So cheers, everyone. Enjoy your Sunday, and make it a great week.